favorite edition? This is a very easy question. Third edition is my favorite edition of D&D, the real name-bearing D&D. As I mentioned in videos prior, I think Pathfinder has done a great job of improving on third edition. So if we count Pathfinder as D&D, Pathfinder would be my new favorite edition. If I had to choose a least favorite edition, I would say 4th edition. I've had a lot of fun playing 4th edition, but not as a D&D game. I love playing 4th edition as a tactical miniature war game, because it's how it was designed. Everything about 4th edition combat is just like, here's a grid and fight. And my favorite way to play 4th edition is just to get into combat after combat. I don't really feel like the system itself... When I create a character in 4th edition, I don't really feel like it's a real person, and I don't really feel like role-playing that person. Although, 2 of my favorite characters that I've ever created, Candlejack and Wick, both tactical warlords, were in 4th edition. And I had a lot of fun creating the backstory and everything for those guys. But when it comes to actually sitting down at the table and playing the game, all I want to do is the tactical miniature combat for section of the game. I don't want to do skill challenges, and I don't want to roleplay talking to people. And whereas in 3rd edition, I totally do love all of that stuff. So 3rd edition would be my favorite real D&D edition. By real, I mean actually called D&D. Although, as soon as D&D Next comes out, that's looking pretty promising. And I might think that that could usurp 3rd edition as my favorite real D&D. I'm making air quotes as I say that. When I look back, I'm not super fond of old D&D and basic D&D. I like having more options, and I like having more fiddly bits, because I'm really good at memorizing rules. So those games are very, very simple, and they require a lot of what's sometimes called DM fiat, sometimes called DM intervention, sometimes called rulings. In fact, that's an old school kind of rallying cry, is rulings, not rules. 3rd edition went the route of, we are going to provide a rule for everything, so that the DM doesn't have to make up rulings on the spot. And the point of that was, in 3rd edition, they didn't want the game to be different from table to table. A basic D&D, 1st edition, 2nd edition, part of the whole draw of the game was that every DM could come up with their own house rules. And there are people where there's just, we run it basically by the book, but we ignore, these rules, and here's a couple extra rules that fix things that I think are broken in the system. And broken doesn't necessarily mean overpowered. Sometimes broken means that literally just doesn't work right, or it's too complicated. So one of the big draws of those is that people created their own house rules. Now, some of them had a few, and some of them you could sit down at a DM's table and he could hand you 10 pages of house rules that he created. And you would, playing in that game and then going to someone else's table, it would seem almost like an entirely different game. It uses the same dice, but otherwise, the rules could be completely different. 3rd edition said, we don't like that, because it makes it difficult for people to transition from one table to the next. Things you learn at one table are wrong at the next table, and what have you. So they tried to standardize the rules. The problem with that is now you had too many rules. And for most people, you can't remember all the rules, all the little corner cases, the +1 for standing on higher ground, the -4 penalty to ranged attacks if your target is prone. I, on the other hand, am very good at memorizing that kind of stuff. I don't even sit there and try to memorize it. It just happens when I read it. And so when it comes to 3rd edition and even 4th edition, all those tiny little rules are right in my brain, and I can name them off. Now, one thing I don't have down, which I can tell you from yesterday playing at a game of Pathfinder, I don't know all the little changes Pathfinder has made. So, for example, last night I tried to defensively cast a spell. In 3rd edition, when you defensively cast, you have to roll your concentration check. And if I remember correctly, the DC in 3rd edition is 15 plus spell level. So the DC for my 2nd level spell would have been 17. If you cast defensively, you don't draw an attack of opportunity. In Pathfinder, if you do a concentration check, the DC is 15 plus 2 times the spell level, and if you fail the concentration check, you don't draw an attack of opportunity, you lose the spell slot. And so in Pathfinder, my DC for the 2nd level spell I was casting would have been 19. And I rolled a 17, so I thought I succeeded, but one of the other guys who plays a spellcaster and had just finished reading the Pathfinder rules for concentration checks pointed out that no, in this one, that's what happens. I'm like, okay, so I lost the spell. So I know that was pointed out as a difference to me. I played a lot of 2nd edition, and I read, my first books that I read that I really got into because of how detailed they were the 1st edition AD&D books. And then the first game when I started to really play was 2nd edition AD&D. So those hold a lot of nostalgia for me, and I really do enjoy it. And when I get down and I see the font, that old school typewriter type font in the 1st edition books and the 2 columns and the tiny little text, I get so nostalgic for it. But I would say that those aren't my favorite editions. 3rd edition is my favorite. Pathfinder is even better. And D&D Next, based on the playtest materials, is looking pretty dang good too. And could easily fit right up there with Pathfinder, maybe even be better than Pathfinder, depending on how those final rules look. So this will be a pretty short one because there's not as much to talk about. All right, until next time, bye-bye.